All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Today's parsha is Ki Tavo, which in the, what do we have here? Eitz Chaim is page 1140. Right, so the general context, as you all know, is Moses is giving his final speeches to the children of Israel. This is a generation that had not been at Sinai. They're the next generation. They don't know all this back history, so Moses is rehearsing it all for them. And in this portion, we get the blessings and the curses and the curses and the curses and the curses. If any of you have read the last part of this parasha, it is really depressing. Every bad thing you can think of is told and repeated and then told again. So I don't know if we want to talk about that or read all of that, but it's a pretty depressing mess.
I think we have enough depression outside.
Yeah. I think one thing we could talk about without actually reading the portion is, why is Moses doing this? It's one thing to say, if you follow my commands and do my mitzvot, then things will go good for you when you get into the land. And if you don't, things will go bad. Fair enough. But to go through a verse after verse after verse of cursing is a bit much. So I want to come back to that. But I thought we could start. Sorry?
Sure. Hi.
Okay, food one.
It's pronounced tochacha,
Oh, yeah, like a rebuke or something like that?
rebuke, right? In the context of the Holocaust, some of these curses, they're so terrifying. And it seems to, in a way, foreshadow what actually happens to the Jews in so many times during history.
Yeah.
And some of the commentators say it has to do with exile. It has to do with prosperity. Having success, material success, and forgetting about God. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Or is that too
it's such a negative section, and it's so long, and it's quite repetitious. All these curses are going to happen like 2, 3, 4 times. So one question is, why is Moses doing this? One is, does this tell us something about when the book was put together, that we're facing exile or in exile? And so this is actual suffering going on. Is this, you're right, it's foreshadowing so much, certainly of European Jewish history, not so much the Sephardi, but certainly the Ashkenazi. What do you make of all this, right? The Haftorah is quite positive. The Haftorah is a much nicer read, probably because after reading this Torah portion,
Kumio read.
Huh?
Kumio read.
Yeah, you need a much better Haftorah. But I think it's a question of why so many curses in such graphic detail. Is that what the people need to hear? Yeah.
I think Moshe has learned about the Hebrews, the Israelites all along. They complained, all this. And now that he's leaving, he wants to make sure that the laws are ingrained in their brains.
Okay. So this is what I want to say. Moses dealing with his own insecurity? His own, what's my legacy going to be?
If you don't list all the bad things, then they might do one of the things that you've left out, you know what I mean?
I see that, yes.
They'll think it's okay. If you don't list them and say they're bad, they might just think that's okay.
Oh, it's not on the list of,
You mean like turkey?
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
he doesn't trust the.
yeah, but he's not
doesn't trust the
saying,
populace to follow.
he's not listing all the things you shouldn't do. Because he's just been doing that for the last 26 chapters. He just says, if you disobey, this will happen and this will happen. You won't have crops, your grapes won't have, you'll be conquered. You'll have grapes, but the enemy will have the wine. You'll have a house, but your enemy will live in it. You'll have a wife, but your enemy will enjoy it. You'll starve. You won't share. Even the nicest among you will become mean. And he goes on and on and on.
Samuel does the same thing when they ask for a king. He tells them all the negative things that are gonna happen. They don't tell them the good things.
Yeah.
Well, he's reminding them of the consequences of misbehavior.
But these are pretty hard. I mean, if you want, we can read through the section, but you'd be really depressed. And it's very graphic and horrible. Yeah,
But on the reverse, it didn't work.
right.
So what does it say?
It was, right.
Yeah. Well, neither side worked. Yeah, the people kind of drifted away and did whatever, and they got conquered and then blah. But the stuff that is predicted didn't happen either. Or maybe for a short period of time, but I mean, it's devastating what the consequences are going to be, and we're still around. So it's just an odd thing. And I do wonder what was reading through it yesterday, what is going on here? You tell people, all right, you need to obey the word of the Lord. Fine, they've heard that before. But this kind of graphic repeated cursing.
Yeah, we have the same catalog of curses in Leviticus.
Yeah, but not like this.
But there, there's some at the end, God says, but I will take you back.
Right.
So there's some consolation.
Here
there isn't.
Right.
And here, one of the reasons that's given for that kind of destruction and terror is that you don't express joy in the relationship. The idea of being joyful and happy and performing the mitzvot and so forth, and without joy is one of the reasons they give for it.
Right.
It seems.
I want to come back to that whole, because I think there's a even deeper problem there. But Nelson, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. Why isn't he just a grumpy old man?
Okay.
And it's sort of, to me, it's Moses's failure. He's had all kinds of opportunity to teach, and he doesn't trust himself. He hasn't succeeded at it. He thinks he's going to be 100% successful, and he has to realize teachers are never 100% successful.
Right. I kind of agree with you that this is Moses's thing, and he just can't be negative enough.
But we don't want to see him, we want to see some negativity. After all, this is not all the good things. But yeah, you're right. I'm not sure I agree with Nelson that he's a grumpy old man. He may be grumpy, but he doesn't have to be this grumpy.
Right. It doesn't have to be this grumpy.
Yeah,
But it's one thing to say, you come into the land, and if you obey my rules and regulations and my mitzvot and chukim and mishpatim, whatever, you'll have good crops, and your cattle will have kids. Actual kids, not humans. It's page 1140.
thank you.
And you'll have wine and you'll have honey and everything will go good. If you disobey me, then you say none of that will happen. You don't have to go and say, and you're going to starve and there'll be no food and you'll be eating your kids and you'll turn on each other and you'll be starving and there'll be no food, and whatever you do, the strangers will take over and you'll be starving, and
But they do that in the prophets. They are pretty, I mean, some of the things, especially Isaiah, they're pretty graphic.
Yeah.
They tell you all the things that they were doing. You don't just say that they're bad, but they describe them.
Right. Anyway, it just struck me reading through it as just,
It's not
over the
about, it's not about Moses, though. I mean, Moses is the predominant voice
right.
in Deuteronomy, but remember, it's still God. He's the prophet conveying God's word to the people. And we have, examples in this, I think it's in 26 here, the steels that they are to write certain things. It doesn't say exactly what, but they say these steels, these stones painted on these stones.
Yeah,
This is an example of the written word, the strength and power historically of the Torah, that the textuality, in Judaism, that this is written down for us and we read it every year, and it's seared into our brains and our hearts. And the question is this, if you do X, then there'll be Y. If you don't, then this is a kind of hypothetical reasoning, and maybe it's an effective way of establishing conscience and morality, law and order. Isn't that what it's all about?
Well, partially, it would seem to me it should also be about, look, I'm about to leave you guys. Aaron's died, I'm going to go up in the mountain in a couple of chapters. This is the end of it. Listen to what God says, do what God says, and things will be fine. If you don't, you can't count on that. But go in, do what you're supposed to do, and it'll work. That's how you'd like him to leave. Not saying, boy, you guys are going to get cursed. Oh my God, it's going to be horrible. Oh, you can't even imagine how bad it's going to be.
Did it start like that? I mean, the backsliding and the backsliding and the backsliding, and it's like you have to keep elevating the consequences to try to get people to conform.
No, I understand what you're saying, but they haven't even gotten to the land yet, right? They're standing at the edge. They're going to cross the Jordan. They're going to put up these two stelae, right, with the Torah written on them. I don't know if it's the entire Torah, but whatever it is.
I can't remember.
So-
It couldn't possibly be the entire.
No.
You have to define what Torah means.
Right. So is it the Ten Commandments? Is it the Book of Deuteronomy? Is it
Yeah, it's, I mean,
one of the
they
Talmudic
never-
tractates? Huh?
in the Torah, they never make it to the land. It's
Right.
Well, they do, right?
The book of
Joshua.
Joshua and Judges do, right?
Right.
Joshua gets the land almost immediately, and they get to Jericho, and then right after Jericho, they start doing the wrong things.
Right.
Right, so it's all about, and this is one of Jonathan Sack's big ideas. Is it possible to have freedom and order at the same time?
Right.
And he always says, you go back to the flood. The world before the flood was of, murder and sexual misconduct and so on. And it was total freedom, chaos, compared to slavery in Egypt, which was total order without any freedom.
Right.
So can they create a society where they have freedom and order? And the establishment of the laws, and again, it's all what this is all about in Deuteronomy, all of these laws,
Right.
and ethics to create that possibility.
So let me switch the subject a little bit. Let's start reading the portion, because there's another, I think, deeper philosophical question, which you're kind of leading up to, which I think we also should talk about. So, well, does somebody want to start reading? This is on 26, it's page 1140.
Following,
All right.
when you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land the Lord your God is giving you. Put it in a basket and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land the Lord swore to our fathers to assign to us. The priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And then there comes this passage, as my wife says, that they copied directly out of the Haggadah.
Somehow it's the other way.
So why are we doing this? What's the theology behind this? Bringing the first fruits and saying, I've entered the land, God gave it to me, God promised to me.
It's thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
It's recognizing that it's not the person who was the farmer alone, that it was God who facilitated that crop.
Okay. Yeah, I like that answer, that when the earth yields its fruit or the cattle give birth to little cattle, that it's yeah, the farmer put a lot of work and effort. He invested a lot of energy and resources, but part of it is God, right? Some will say 10% is God, right? Who blessed the soil, who brought the rain, who, whatever. And so you want to acknowledge God's ownership of 10% or whatever it is, right? That's the tithe.
That's the Levites get the 10%.
Right. Well, God says, give my 10% to the Levites because they don't have land. But I think the point is to acknowledge that while we are farmers and herders and all that, without God's intervention or God's blessing, like we wouldn't be able to succeed. Right.
And even God's encouragement. Encouragement can be
Right.
a plus in any enterprise.
It's also saying, hey, we do have to say thank you.
Right.
Don't take the things for granted. You got it? Say thank you.
Say thank you. And this is a way of remembering when you bring your first few fruits and you trek to Jerusalem that, you're in a partnership with God in a way. God's one of the investors, right? And you want to acknowledge that.
Well, certainly on the board of directors.
Or certainly on the board of directors.
He is the board of directors.
He is the board of directors.
And the president and the health.
Right.
Yeah, but also it's the community, you're sharing the fruits of your labor with the Levites, but you're coming to this place that God has designated, and you're coming and you enjoy and community and you're participating and you're building this fellowship.
Right. And you're going to the one place where God chooses the divine name to dwell. We assume Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
And you give it to the priest. I mean, I have this vision of these tens of thousands of farmers from all over the place, all of a sudden showing up with their first fruit. It must have been, and everybody has to recite this passage from the Haggadah. And everybody, and the priest is down to do something with all this produce, right?
You're supposed to eat it. I don't know.
No, it goes to the altar. Now,
It doesn't get burned.
no, he sets it down in front of the altar and then we move
Something
on.
has to do with it sooner or later.
Something has to happen, right?
But my question is, before the temple, which is like 400 or 500 years after they get into the land,
Well, it's not that long, but yeah,
whatever the number is.
whatever, yeah.
Half century.
I thought it was that long. Were they doing this to wherever the tabernacle was? At that time? Or do we not know that?
Well, I mean,
It's not designated as a specific place at this.
Well, the place hasn't been designated.
Right,
right.
they have to wait for orders.
I mean, the place hasn't been designated until we get to Solomon. Maybe David.
Yeah, well, the tabernacle is the forerunner of this.
Right, so does everybody have to run there? What seems archaeologically to be the case is that there were lots of local
Local shrines.
shrines and local priesthoods, and that you brought it to the one, you know, in your neighborhood.
Your
And then
LOR.
later on, there was.
Your LOR,
Yes,
your local organized Orthodox rabbi.
your LOL. You know, you bring it to your local priest. And then later on, there was, once you get the temple, David, especially Solomon, then you try to consolidate all this and shut down those altars and those alternative shrines, whatever they are, and consolidate everything, because otherwise you have 12 tribes, you don't have one Israel, right? You see what I'm saying? So there seems to have been, and we know from the prophets who are writing, who keep saying, shut down your altar, that this did not happen overnight. It may never have really happened fully anyway. That the centrality of Jerusalem was always iffy.
Well,
And if you're coming
It
from
only
Ephraim,
lasted through Solomon.
well, that's true. Then you had the split. And then it got easier because it was just the people in Judah who were coming. That's true.
And Benjamin.
So what the narrative is, all right, you bring your first fruits, well, and your tithes and so forth, and God will bless the land, and you'll be able to do this next year, right? You'll have produce and you'll have. If you don't do this, then what happens?
You get punished.
Okay,
The rains won't come,
The rain comes,
you'll have hailstones and locusts and all kinds of other delightful things.
right. And I mean, I have two questions here. One is, I decide, oh, this is nonsense. You know, I have to bring my food to Jerusalem. I've got young kids at home. My wife is, you know, whatever. I'm just not going to go this year. So I get the locust, but next door it's fine.
Makes no sense.
They don't explain that.
So, you know, like how this actually works, like this farm, and that farm, but not this, you know.
Oh, well, wait a minute. That's exactly what happened last week with the electricity.
That's right. Some people.
And in between, they had electricity. I mean, it was exact, with no sense at all.
That's not true.
That's true.
Good people have electricity and.
And the bad people who didn't bring their first fruits, right?
You, Lee.
Well, did you go to the
I'm a bad-
114?
Yes. But who's counting?
So, I mean, the other question is whether we should look at this, I mean, this, whatever the rhetoric is here, is this also in a way something natural? In other words, God says, this is how you should treat the land. Fallow every 7 years, you don't, sow different things together at the same time. If you follow these rules, the soil will be good, the agriculture will be good, everything will be fine. If you decide you're going to do your own thing and you don't care about the rules, the regulations, the way you're supposed to do it, then you're going to be in trouble. I mean, is this just, are these punishments or blessings not so much punishments and blessings as if you follow good agricultural practice, things will go good. And if you don't follow good agricultural practices, things are going to go bad. Not as bad as he says, but still. I mean, is maybe that what we're talking about?
I think so, because I read about the only place now in the world that some of our fruits and vegetables are still having all the vitamins that they are and the minerals and all the nutrition values that they are supposed to have is actually in Israel.
Uh-huh.
And I think because of the Shemitah.
All right. So that would be fulfilling, as it were, what's being said here.
Yeah.
You follow these rules,
All right.
let the soil recover, whatever it is, things will go good. And if not, well, there are going to be consequences, use a lot of fertilizer, use a lot of pesticides. You're going to end up with lousier fruit.
It's interesting though that, I mean, like Joseph started with the idea of not Shemitah so much, but letting land lay fallow. Nobody paid any attention to it really till the Middle Ages. And if, when you don't have produce. I mean, the land doesn't, as Paulina says, the land doesn't produce after a while.
They do the rotating of the crops now, but I don't think that's the same as letting it rest completely.
But it's part of the farmer's toolbox, right?
It's
Yeah.
similar but different.
So the land though.
It's resting, that a different crop treats uses the land differently.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's certain things that probably every crop uses and that never gets rested.
I know a family that's had grown soybeans for
I
many
don't really
years
know.
and
I'm not a farmer.
to shrimp.
To shrimp?
They're raising shrimp.
Not on the same
And
land.
the soybean?
I guess they must have set out a body of water. They're
Something.
raising shrimp, This is in Iowa.
But I mean, I think it's also like farm workers or something, you rotate them through different things and then you give them a day off, but you rotate them through different tasks. Right? I mean,
Right.
so again, my question is, what we're reading here, Moses makes it sound like God is going to bless you or God is going to punish you. And you can kind of switch that on and off, right? You do this, God will bless you. You do that. It's not that God will stop blessing you. God will curse you.
That's
Right.
more active.
Yeah.
But you make choices and you
live with the
if
consequences.
your choices are all wrong,
Everything's conditioned.
you're gonna bring it on yourself.
Right.
It's not God, it's your choice, if you violate the
And that
base.
changes the rhetoric considerably, and that's kind of maybe where I'm
Right.
sort of heading. I mean, according to the rabbinic tradition, right? Serving God and doing the mitzvot because you're scared is the wrong motivation. Right?
Right.
If you don't do this and this and this, you're going to go to hell. Well, that's not the right reason. We as the Jewish people should be doing the mitzvot and all that because, well, we have a covenant of God. We've agreed to do this. This is part of our duty, not out of fear. That's,
You should be doing it because it's the right thing. It's inherently that's Immanuel Kant, the great
Right.
Enlightenment philosopher.
right.
He put down Judaism for the hypothetical thing. If you do X, then you'll be rewarded. And if you don't, you'll be punished. He thought that was a bunch of malarkey. Do it for the right thing. But remember, this is the beginning of morality in a sense. They're just starting out. They're like children and they need guidance. We need guidance. And then once it's internalized, then you do it because it's the right thing. But children have to be taught, right? They have to be instructed.
Right. Well, we've had children and we've instructed them and taught them, but we didn't bring this kind of apocalyptic doom about it.
Right.
We wanted them to be mentally healthy. Huh?
You can carry a big stick.
Yeah, but we never used it.
Oh.
They had carrots in the other pocket.
Yeah.
But one of the-
But you were gonna say something?
Yeah, the Christians came afterward, but these same Tochachot, their response would be, you go to hell. You
Right.
don't say you're gonna go to hell. You're gonna get punished here, and you're not gonna have the food to eat, but you have a chance to correct it. You don't have to go straight to death, to hell or whatever.
Right. Right. So that, I mean, I think that's another way of looking at this, and then Moses just kind of got caught up in his own rhetoric.
I don't think so. I think that it's like you treat differently small kids. You put rules down. You don't want them to stay after a certain hours when they want not to go to sleep or play on the computer. So as they grow up, the Israelites coming out of Egypt, they were without, they didn't have, and from bondage, they were avadim, and they were instructed to do things. So there is a way to do it, not from one to the other, or all of a sudden nehorim, because they don't know how to deal with it. And that's why they cry all the time that they want to go back to Egypt and not to die in the desert. So I think it's like, it's a certain way of teaching them.
So Moses is saying in a over the top way, look, these guys are, I mean, they're wandering in the wilderness, right? What do they know about farming? So he's saying, you're going to the land, you're going to conquer it, you're going to become farmers, do it this way. Remember the first fruits, bring them to God, because, you know, God gave you the land. When you have tithe, bring the tithe. We want to support the religious institutions, right? And he's telling them, and he says, and if you don't do this, you're going to get into trouble. Is that what he's kind of giving them the instructions of how to be, yeah.
I was thinking that this sounds a lot like our current politicians. If you vote for me, all these good things will happen. And if you don't vote for me, all the bad things will happen. So we haven't learned the lesson. We're still doing it today.
Yeah.
That's a good, yeah.
But I think
Because they don't-
it's not just for themselves, not for us.
Because in other words, there is one side or another side.
Yeah.
And Judaism generally says, there is an in-between path, and you can get yourself out of the trouble. And the politicians today don't think that way. Theirs is either one end or the other end.
So they are also for themselves.
And it ain't good in either one.
It's never gonna stop either.
Yeah. That's not Ivan, that's Nelson.
Sitting here.
You know, the psychology again, I think, is all wrong. But the number one thing that Moses is really trying to get across is that the greatest thing in your lifetime is about to happen to you. You're going to enter the promised land, and you're going to conquer it. And in spite of all that, he's being negative. Like, he's afraid. It'll go to their heads?
Right.
He doesn't trust them. And your children are the same way. When you give them a bargain, like, if you do this, then I'm going to make you, I don't know what, tomorrow you won't get a candy bar. And the kid gets to decide, well, what would I rather have? The candy bar tomorrow or the TV tonight?
Right.
And it's a choice. And it's just the wrong psychology for children. So we never threatened our kids. We told them, you're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, period. That's the end of the story. We'll discuss it if you want to discuss it. And he doesn't tell them why it's the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do because you're going to be punished if you don't do it. I like the idea that it's the right thing to do because it's good farming practice. And you can build a lifetime out of it. Because that's to give a real reason to work with and to grow from. But that you're going to get punished? No. All right.
Yeah.
But Moses is talking to a horde of people who aren't farmers, who have no experience with it.
Right.
And he really has to make it concrete and so that they understand. They can't say this is farming practice.
Right. So he's trying to scare the poop out of them, right?
He's trying to scare them into really doing
Huh?
Moving daylights.
The living daylights, sorry.
And they always keep repeating that they are a stiff-necked people.
Well, I mean, people are stiff-necked.
They don't listen.
It's one of the Al Hates.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? Yeah, we're okay. Yeah, I mean, Moses himself, and I think, what did you say? This?
Politicians.
No, something about an old man, grumbly old man or
I
something.
didn't say that.
Somebody did.
Nelson
I think
said,
Nelson did.
Oh, there was Nelson. I mean, I can also see that Moses, I mean, he's ready to die. He's facing death, right?
He's 120 years old.
Yeah, you know, and
But he's also bitter because he brought them out and he can see it and he will not go there.
right.
So that can be also something.
And he's handing the reins over to this
Joshua.
young Pisher, Joshua. You know, good luck. So,
Well, I think they say he was like 60 at this point.
well, Moses is 120. so,
Right. So he's a young, that makes him a young.
Young
pitcher.
guy, right.
In those days, it was actually still old, because I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, look, if we had a politician today who was 60, we'd say he's young, right?
yeah.
Nowadays, yeah. He's
It's
so
all
young.
relative.
He's too young.
Right. Only 60, he's got no experience. So anyway, I mean, I think Moses overreacted here. And if, I don't know if you want to read that portion, but it's pretty gruesome and it goes on and on and on and on. So,
Oh, I think that's the part
well,
actually.
you
that
gotta
Michael
read it,
Milgram
but you
reads
read
often.
it quietly, so you read
He's
it
reading today.
in
Yeah.
low tones.
yeah,
That's Michael Milgram usually does it very quietly.
yeah.
It's gonna be one of the Milgrams, because that's all that's reading today.
So I like the beginning part where you bring your first fruit, you acknowledge God. I mean, they do walk in and they do conquer the land and they do become farmers. They do establish themselves. And we know archaeologically it worked. It didn't happen overnight, right? It was like the Ukrainian counteroffensive, you know, it was a slog, but they did it, right? And then later on, they really get threatened by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, so on and so forth. And maybe that's sort of the background
Without the
here,
Philistines.
huh?
Without the Philistines, they
Oh,
were
the
at them all the
Philistines.
time.
Right. So there were enemies around. So maybe this
Yeah.
is
You know, this, you know, for the, you know, the height, the idea of the, you know, who wrote the Torah, the hypothetical concept, not hypothetical, what is it, this,
the
hypothesis.
documentary hypothesis.
Documentary hypothesis that this was written sometime in the 7th century,
Right.
right before the destruction of the first temple, you know, in the time of Isaiah, you know, and so that this is speaking to the people before or maybe even after they were exiled into Babylonia. And so that they're reading this as a kind of a manual of instruction. What did we do wrong? Are we going to be able to come back? You know, that's the audience, one of the audiences at that time. The people there on the east bank, and the people that are maybe in exile in Babylonia.
Right.
That's written in hindsight for future generations rather than.
Yes, or addressing the people there who are facing an existential threat, right?
Right, right.
So the documentary hypothesis would be that Deuteronomy was written or published or whatever in the late 600s. The conquest is 588. So,
Right.
you know, not even a generation later, right? So they're seeing these enemies rising. They're seeing an existential threat. And they're saying, look, Moses already said, you guys have strayed away. You're doing all kinds of crazy things. And Moses said, this is going to happen.
Right.
So kind of.
And it happens, and they come back
Right.
in the sixth century,
Jeremiah, who's writing around the same time, the prophet Jeremiah,
right?
his message, it made him very unpopular, is, look, you all think you've got a covenant with God. God promised you the land. It's going to be a heritage, which we read right here. So you figure whatever you do is okay because we're under this divine protection, this divine covenant and so forth. And Jeremiah's message is, hey, don't count on that, right? Because if you violate it enough, God will just take away the covenant.
Right.
I got a question, and Moses lives 120 years.
Right.
He starts out pretty young, actually.
Yeah.
All right, but the point is that we always say that they have to get rid of each generation, which is like 20 years, because they're not gonna enter the land. So it seems to me he's like the only one who manages to go through the whole period, and he had watched people drop off in the meantime.
Right. I think Joshua also survived the whole thing, but yeah, basically he's the only one who's seen the whole history. Yeah.
Actually, the ones that died were the ones over 20.
Right. The ones
So
over.
anybody under 20 who had a memory would have known.
True.
I find the question that keeps recurring to me,
Is that the same hand or the
how
next
did
hand?
Moses learn farming?
Right.
Because he was raised
He
in
was
a
a shepherd.
palace.
He was a shepherd.
Yeah.
He wasn't even that.
Abraham was,
So yeah, Nelson.
Can't hear you.
Well, I have a different question. In Babylon, once they got settled, at some point they wanted to stay. Very
Right.
few went back. When did
Right.
that happen? And
That
how does
happened-
all this
I've-
translate there with that sense of I want to stay here. Don't push me back to that other country.
536.
Doing well.
yeah,
536, 535, right in there,
right,
was when Cyrus said that the Jews can go back, and some did, but as you say, a lot did not. They were settled, they had their farms, had their families, had their jobs, they had whatever, and they stayed. And what we do know is that 500 years later, when we get to the time of Hillel and so forth, there's a huge Babylonian Judean community that's still surviving there.
right.
And that's 500 years later.
And you also have Egypt, Alexandria.
Yeah, that seems to be people who have moved to Alexandria in Greco-Roman times, but we think the
Right.
Babylonian community of the first century were descendants of the 6th century group.
Right,
That they stayed there, they prospered, they did just fine, thank you.
right. Yeah, they had learning academies. We had
Right.
lots of great literature that came out of that.
Right.
Ezra and Nehemiah came back, and remember, the first thing they did was to read the book of Deuteronomy to the people that were still in Israel and to the people that, that came back.
Right.
They took a book out, and the scholars say it was probably the book of Deuteronomy.
Right. Right.
So you had this resonating throughout the centuries. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Right. And I mean, not to get too much into politics, but you hear a lot of this rhetoric today in the current Israeli government about the West Bank and, well, Judea and Samaria, whatever we're calling it now, right? I call it Judea. So, yeah, this is a theme, but I think it's a misstated theme. I would much rather Moses have said, look, if you follow the rules and regulations, things will go good. If you don't, then, you're going to mess up. Rather than turning it into blessings and curses, which turns God into this Egyptian taskmaster kind of person, right? You see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Do I have to leave the room now?
I don't know.
I'm thinking about the people that stayed in Babylonia.
Oh, okay.
or Babylon or whatever that was. And I'm thinking about them in comparison to the ones that wanted to go back to Egypt.
Yeah.
But that's as far as I got. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, to me, those are the people that wanted to go back to Egypt. They stayed where they were.
But there's a difference. The ones who
Yeah,
went back.
except that there was a difference. They ended up thriving.
No, but the people who, remember in Egypt, they were pretty much slaves. They were not, they were richer and more successful in Babylon than they were in Egypt.
Yeah.
So when you go, when you want to stay,
Equating those that wanted to go back to Egypt with those that refused to leave Babylon.
because in Babylon, it was much better than it was elsewhere in Egypt or anywhere else.
Look at it.
Babylon, they were settled.
So the people in the wilderness at the Exodus generation, they're saying, forget this whole Moses people moving to the promised land thing. I want to go back to Egypt. So they're leaving the Jewish people or the Israelite people, right? I go back to Egypt, I'll be a slave. I'm fine. You forget all this promise about milk and honey and whatever.
Then you get people who wanted to stay on the East Bank. And
Yeah, we
not
had those
cross the
too.
River,
The Reubenites and the
yeah.
Gadites and
The
the
Gadites and,
half of Menashe.
yeah, Ephraim and Menashe, right. But I think in the case of Babylonia, I mean, if we're correct that the descent, the great grandchildren were still Judean, they didn't leave the Jewish people. They said, we can be Jews here. We don't need the temple. We don't need the priesthood. We can still worship our God.
Right,
And they maintained their identity for generations.
right. It's because
But
they had the written.
But they
had-
didn't do all the mitzvot that were associated with the temple or the land.
Right. But then they didn't have to because they weren't in the land.
Right.
Oh, I
That's what-
have a
that's why I'm
question.
saying,
So what's the difference between the American Jews who want to stay here and don't want to go to Israel? It's the same like the Babylonian Jews,
so why are you here?
because of my husband, he brought me here. I didn't want here, I was kicking and I didn't want to come here, but
Yeah.
So why haven't you gone back?
because of my kids and grandkids, now I'm stuck here. Because they want to come, they are totally American and they won't come to Israel to visit me.
Well, it's a schlep.
It's a schlep.
Yeah.
So- So they stayed in Babylon.
Especially nowadays where it's all tumult in Israel.
But America's been pretty good to the Jews.
Yeah, how long is that gonna last?
Yeah,
Well,
nobody knows.
nobody knows.
You don't
I'm
know.
grateful that
It
my
could turn,
parents
it could
left
turn,
when
it could
they
turn
did,
on a dime.
that they left Europe when they did, because otherwise we would have been decimated.
Right.
So I prefer America to Auschwitz.
Well, yeah. So let me see. So what we're saying, and maybe Moses' warning to the people is, if you stick with God, however you do that, things will go okay. If you abandon the people and God entirely, you're on your own and things will go bad.
It's also reminding them that they have the choice. It's they control the outcome. So it's not like, and that's the important thing, that there is an outcome based on their behavior and they control it.
Right.
Well, what is the nature of the relationship between man and God? Well, what does it mean? How does we're finite. God is infinite. What is the relationship? Judaism is about one God, a monotheistic God, and you either accept that or you have that faith or you don't. You can still be a great person, a moral person,
Right.
without believing in God.
Yeah.
But, are you a Jew then?
Well, maybe that's the real question that comes up here, right?
So we've been asking that question for centuries.
Yeah.
What makes one a Jew?
So, is it possible to keep kosher and kind of keep Shabbat and do the mitzvot? Do you believe in God? Well, I don't know, right?
Right.
Because for us, as opposed to Christians, the belief isn't the important thing, right?
I was.
You don't care if your kid believes in the garbage man or not, just takes out the garbage.
But the critical fact is 4,000 years later, we're here.
Right.
And we survived. We survived the Crusades and the Inquisition and the Holocaust and everything in between. We've always been a tiny people and we always will be. But there's something so special about all of this.
Mhm. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I remember somebody asked my son, do you believe in God? My son said, I'm not sure. And he, well, why do you do what you do? He said, I hedge my bets.
Well, that's another way. Right. Well, any other thoughts on this? I'm going to try to read a little bit more, but I think this was a really good discussion.
Yeah.
Because I think it just raises these really kind of existential questions. What does it mean to be Jewish? And does God bless and curse us, or do we kind of bring these things on ourselves? Right? And is Moses just a grumbly old man? Right?
Rabbi.
I mean, I think it's interesting. There's this part here, that we read in the Haggadah. My father was a wandering Aramean, and he blah blah blah. If you pay attention in the Haggadah, Moses is never mentioned.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
And it's always a
Right.
question like, how can you go through the whole Exodus story and not mention Moses? Right? I mean, how is this even possible?
He was humble.
Well, he was humble.
He was humble and we took it to his word.
But I think there's also,
Talk about it.
We are very, very insistent that he not be worshipped
yes, I think that's part of it.
because of the death. We don't know exactly where he died
Right.
and all that.
We have no place of burial.
Right. So I think that's part of it. We don't worship Moses, right? But I think also what the Haggadah is telling us, yeah, Moses was great, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the point. The point is what the people did. And right? And how we reacted.
It was still called the 5 books of Moses.
Right.
Right.
I think in the Haggadah, God did.
What God did. Yes, for the Haggadah.
Yeah. For
The God and the
yes.
people. Moses was there, yeah, but you don't need him. It's the people.
It could have been anybody. I mean, he was just chosen randomly.
Right.
I mean, he was chosen before birth randomly.
Right. Right. All right, it's 10 o'clock.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.